Hi, welcome to AI for Good. My name is Juan, and I'm from the International Telecommunication Union, or the ITU, the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communications Technology. It's my pleasure to introduce AI for Good Let's Talk, our series of fireside chats dedicated to discussing the intersection of AI, the human experience, and our quest to build a better world and future for all. Let's Talk is part of the AI for Good Global Summit, which is the leading United Nations platform for action-oriented, global, and inclusive dialogue on AI. The goal of the summit is to identify AI solutions that are practical and can advance the Sustainable Development Goals and scale those solutions for global impact. The AI for Good Global Summit is co-organized by ITU and the X Prize Foundation in partnership with 37 United Nations organizations, ACM, and co-convened with Switzerland. I would just like to remind you that this session will actually be streaming live, so all of this is real right now. And I have my Padawan, my beloved Padawan, Melissa. Hi, Melissa, how's it going? She will be monitoring the feed on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter for all of your questions. So feel free to be part of the conversation. We'll make sure that you are involved and the Q&A there after we have our fireside chat. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests today, to Marianna Obrist and Carlos Velasco. Today, we will be talking about multisensory experiences with them. They just released a book on September 30th called Multisensory Experiences, where the senses meet technology, and we'll be having a discussion of what AI means in that sort of context. So Marianna, Carlos, how's it going? Nice to see you guys again.
Nice to see you. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Yeah. So,
nice.
Hi. Yeah. Yeah, no, this is great. So, I'd like our audience to kind of get to know a bit about yourselves. And I figured at this point, it'd be kind of great to kind of just talk about kind of your background. So why don't we start, Mariana? Where are you coming from and what are you interested in?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Marianna Obrist and I'm Professor for Multisensory Interfaces at University College London. I'm originally from North Italy, grown up in the middle of the Alps with goats, which might explain some of the multisensory experience work I'm doing. But I studied at Salzburg University, and that's when I started teaching at computer science, at the computer science department, and telling students, think about what are the senses and capabilities humans have. And so that kind of inspired all the kind of following work I'm doing. And I'm now at UCL, where I'm looking at touch, taste, and smell as novel interaction modalities.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. So I kind of want to point out that Mariana her work has been showcased at the World Economic Forum in 2019 and 2020 at Davos, specifically because of the work she's doing in multisensory experiences. I just wanted to point out that Carlos actually kind of dropped out. I think the connection has been a little weird. So I'll give you a quick brief on his bio, just to give you a sense of what he does when he comes back. So Carlos Velasco is an associate professor at the Department of Marketing at BI Norwegian Business School in Norway, where he co-founded the Center of Multisensory Marketing. Carlos received his PhD, Director of in Experimental Psychology from Oxford University. His work is at the intersection between psychology, marketing, and human-computer interaction, and focuses on understanding and capitalizing on multisensory experiences and their guiding principles. Carlos has worked with a number of companies from around the world on multisensory experiences, and he can talk a bit about more of what he's doing here and why he's so passionate about the field since he's back now. Hi, Carlos.
Hi everyone. It is very nice to be here with you, and thanks Juan and Melissa for hosting us. So as you were saying, I have a PhD in experimental psychology. I've been historically very interested in how is that our senses integrate information from, how we integrate information from different senses while we experience the world around us, such that it kind of like creates the experiences that we have about the world. And in addition to that, I am very interested in kind of like studying how is that we can understand those principles that explain how we integrate information such that we can design experiences for people. And that's basically what I'm doing. As you said, I'm a professor here at the Norwegian Business School, and I have an active research program in marketing, psychology, and human-computer interaction in multisensory experience.
Yeah, no, that's really great. And I think that kind of leads us to kind of one of the first questions I had when we were talking about this during the tech rehearsal. I find it really fascinating that we talk about AI and creative computation, right? That's kind of been an emerging field in the past few years. And I'm really curious about what your perspective is on where multisensory experiences can allow us to create new types of experiences. Please elaborate more on that if it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I can give a first go. And I would like to take one step back, because when we talk about multisensory experiences right now, we should be aware that we are still in charge for creating those experiences. And as you said, in the book we just released, we're trying to define what are multisensory experiences and also look at how technology is really enabling a huge amount of new explorations. And when you think about AI and the advances of AI, then we also can ask the question, so how can machines maybe in the future create those experiences for us? And what are the kind of like principles they should follow? Because right now we are creating them, and we also kind of have certain kind of intentions for creating those experiences and designing them for someone. However, as we go forward, there is the kind of transition between what humans can do, but also technology algorithms can do. And we try to lay out these foundations and also some ground rules on what to consider when we are designing multisensory experiences.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think one of the challenges there for me, as at least when we were discussing it, was kind of the taking the perspective of AI as an augmentative technology, not just for information, but also kind of human senses, how we experience things, how we take in information, and how we relay information and communicate with each other. One of the things I've experienced, like just being able to work with the AI for Good team and the AI for Good Global Summit, is that that can go both ways. You can go with really positive AI solutions and experiences where we could do stuff that really helps the world and helps the individual, but we could also deal with situations where AI can do negative things, such as propagate false information, be able to create bias in terms of how we process data or we provide data. And I was kind of curious about what type of how that kind of impacts like the in the context of multisensory experiences, how people will deal with that situation.
I think pretty much the future is unwritten in that sense. Like this is something that we discussed at the very last chapter of our book. There are no rules at this moment. And this is one of the things that we really, really want to draw people's attention to, is like, how should we really think about multisensory experiences in light of all these new technologies? Because computational power is just increasing, and the more it increases, the more kind of like flexibility and I guess ability to do things that we will have in terms of experiences. We already talk a little bit about programming experiences, if you like. If you think about just how companies are capitalizing on artificial intelligence to kind of like deliver customer experience, you see that they gather data, intelligently process that data, and kind of like give back specific experiences. But then the question is, how do we make sure that these tools are used or are available for everyone in a way, and that everyone in a way knows how they work, so that we can actually put that in the public debate and know what sort of things we should and shouldn't do in a way. I'm not sure if you agree with me, Mariana. That's kind of like the discussion that we have in the final chapter.
Yes, I absolutely agree. It's just kind of like responsibilities we are having by, having AI and all kind of opportunities opening up here. And I think one thing I would like to add what Carlos was saying is also the kind of like term data and big data, because we have a lot of data around visual and also auditory stimuli, for instance. But when you think about multisensory, where we talk about touch, taste, and smell, we are still not having those kind of rich data sets. And I believe that it's not so much like always the quantity of data, but we also need to consider very much the quality of the data, because it's very subjective and personal, the experiences one can create. It can be for kind of social interactions, it can be for healthcare, or it can be for work related. What we need to kind of really keep in mind is there is a human who is the receiver of those experiences, and we need to be very careful about how to design it and not just trust data, but be careful about the quality of the data as well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think one of the things that could be really interesting, because when we discussed this previously, was kind of the conversation between big data versus small, rich data. A lot of companies, a lot of work right now, and a lot of push has been about being able to do data collection for big data, to be able to amass a lot of information so that when we provide that information to machine learning models, they'll be able to provide more accurate situations. But it sounds like what you're saying is that we should be more specific about what type of data we're looking for, and how that interacts with a person. And I kind of am curious about what you would imagine those type of data points would be.
Sorry,
It's a good. Oh,
if you allow me to say something very quick about it, it's like it's not only. I mean, I guess one big part is the quality of the data, but also from where and who are we getting the data is the other question. I'm just thinking about a system. We talk about this system. Probably you guys are familiar with. It's called Philips Hue. It's kind of like a system that you can install in your house, Internet of Things. You can control the lighting system and everything. But the first question that we would ask ourselves is something like, who can actually purchase that system? Because the system is not accessible to everyone to start with. So let's say that you want to learn how people design the light environments of their houses such that it changes their behavior. We will access only very specific data from a very specific subgroup of people. And the question would be, is that data enough to inform, let's say, how we design an experience in a completely different environment where this initial data is not representative of the other environment in which we are designing for? So that's kind of like the other aspect of it. Please, Mariana.
no, but yeah, that's a good point to really know where the data come from. And to go specific on the data, maybe an example helps from the research I'm doing. So for instance, we looked at tactile experiences. So mid-air haptics, that's basically a technology where you can have tactile experiences without physical contact. So it's just using ultrasound and then it stimulates your hand, for instance. And one of the first studies we did there is trying to combine quantitative with qualitative data. So on one hand, I know the characteristics and the parameters of the stimulus itself. I know the frequency, I know the location and the intensity. But on the other hand, what I'm trying to understand, how do people describe this experience? So the descriptors they are using. And then what we try to do is a mapping between this kind of quantitative parameters to the subjective descriptors. And that's kind of what I'm trying to kind of think of AI can, and NLP also can help us to have the different layers. So you need the kind of numbers, but don't just use the numbers, but add the semantics layer on top of it.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And I think it brings up an interesting question, right? Like when we look at artificial intelligence as a technology, it really provides, it isn't the end all, it isn't the end of a pipeline, right? It's in the middle of a pipeline. And we combine it with other technologies to be able to derive analytics and insights that allow us to make better decisions. And I was kind of curious about, since we're talking about data, we're talking about how this data interacts, and we're also talking about tactile experiences. Where you think AI could provide the most value when coupled with other technologies to provide really strong multisensory experiences that inform and provide feedback to people?
Wow, there are lots of opportunities, examples. I think there are a few I think we wanted to touch on. I think health care is one. Also, food is another maybe topic. We might get to there, and I will let Carlos talk about that. But I think I would like to give an example around maybe healthcare and well-being, where I think multisensory experiences really can make a difference. And one of the things you need to consider there is like, who are you designing for? Is it like a student who is now doing remote teaching, as we were just talking about, or is it an older person who is kind of isolated in their own home? And so how can we actually think of AI system who can be personalized and adaptive to the different situations? And then, for instance, based on the personal characteristics, the context, release certain scents or give tactile stimulations, which can help them to increase their quality of life or their well-being. So just as an example, I'm talking to a care home organization right now where they are trying to introduce tactile stimulus in order for the people in the care home to stay in touch with their loved ones who can't touch them, who can't get involved with them. because of the whole situation we are in right now worldwide. And I think we can have AI and the algorithms to tweak those experiences to really make them relevant for me, but taking into account where they're coming from.
Context.
Yeah, exactly. So just as an example, but food, I think, is another interesting example, right, Carlos?
Yeah, food is a very interesting example, but if you allow me, I would even go like a step back. If you think about how we are currently understanding the human senses, is like we are increasingly using AI and other tools to sort of like try to figure out how our brain combines signals such that we experience the world as we do, right? But one of the things that happens is that traditionally we have been studying, let's say, how vision and touch interact while we perceive something, or how smell and, say, audition interact while we perceive something else. Because studying different interactions between different senses is complex. It's a complex task. And one of the key things in which I think AI can really be helpful these days is, what if we kind of like try to use and capitalize on the sensors that are already out there available, and try to integrate all these different cues and see all the possible computations such that we can learn how, in a specific context, say food, say health, people are actually experiencing what they are experiencing, and how we can tweak it in an intelligent way such that we obtain the outcomes that we want. So kind of like that's one of the things that I would say where AI could be very, very helpful. And of course, in food, well, we can spend a long time talking about food, but food is one of the most multisensory events of our everyday lives. If you think about it, when you are eating something, it's not only, I mean, we eat first with our eyes, right? That's definitely something. You know, if you don't like what you see, you just are not going to eat it. But then you can probably touch it, even if it's with just cutlery or maybe a fork, a knife, chopsticks, whatever. You're going to touch something. You are immersed in a sonic environment. At the same time, you are smelling whatever it's coming out of the food and perhaps something else in the background. And our brain is integrating all that stuff. The more we integrate technology into these food experiences, the more we're going to be able to understand and get lots of data. Then we have to think about quality, how we categorize that data, such that we can interpret how people are experiencing what they're experiencing, which can result in two things. Either we can make food more entertaining if we want, or perhaps design food that it's more palatable for the elderly, or perhaps design foods that are good for specific, I don't know, like purposes in general. So.
Yeah, and just one, sorry, Juan, just to add one example, because Carlos mentioned it, that's like when you're collecting all those data, and one of the examples we have in our book is about like space and space food. And just imagine you're going on months of space travel to go to Mars, and it's like, if you're kind of like a small group of people and the system starts learning what you like, what you don't like, so it can personalize your meals so that it might also make you feel better, happier, or also kind of give you this, as we call them, the memory bites, to cheer you up, because there are little bites back from Earth. But there, I think AI and those systems are very useful because they can learn. And they can really observe, and this kind of longitudinal perspective is very important. Not just this one-off kind of like, oh yeah, do something and then see, but you need to really kind of observe, which we know sensor technologies are now really, and IoT are enabling us to do.
Yeah, that's really exciting, and I really appreciate you bringing this up, because a lot of the work that you're talking about with healthcare, with food, with space, are some of the things that we do cover at the AI for Good Global Summit. Not a plug, it just came up naturally in the conversation. And the thing that I'm really interested in, because it is World Food Day, not a plug, just part of the conversation, is kind of like talking about the work that you've actually explored and observed in food. I know you've been working previously with the ACM Future Computing Academy on the future of computing food. You put together some of the conferences and gatherings regarding this, including a manifesto. And one of the things that has come up is kind of the role of AI in that space. So I was just curious about what you've seen so far in that particular area.
I think, yeah, that's really the point. What we try to make is like connecting different areas which might benefit from AI or technology in general. And with the future of computing and food, we have this manifesto with multiple action points. And what we have seen where AI can be very useful by looking at the whole chain of when we talk about food. So how do we grow food? How do we transport food? So the distribution system, all that can benefit also then the climate issues we are addressing, and then also distributing it locally, and then to the consumption of the end user, where you can appropriate it also with augmented reality, virtual reality, or other systems in order to help. So this kind of whole perspective is from growing it to even like beyond eating, also waste. Technology can be really thought more integrated and supportive.
Sorry to interrupt. I just have one question from our audience. Mariana and Carlos, what are the biggest challenges to your work and mission?
Say again the last part.
What are the biggest challenges to your work and mission?
Okay. It's a good question that we definitely didn't choose a very easy topic. I think from what I can see is one of the biggest challenges is still linked to the data and how to describe and classify data in such a way that we really preserve the quality of an experience and not water it down too much by trying to create some predictive models, which then lose that subjectiveness, which is very important for multisensory experiences. So I think the data collection and the data processing, and also finding and combining the right methods to generate that data is, I think, an important challenge.
And how, just out of curiosity, how would you go about collecting the data? Is it neural? Like, would you strap someone up to an MRI, or would it be someone relays their experiences to you and in like a survey? How would you go about it?
If you want. And I think that basically touches in one of the things that I think it's a key challenge for multisensory experience, and is that when you talk about human experiences, you cannot just say, I'm going to look at them from engineering, or I'm going to look at them from marketing, or I'm going to look at them from art. Multisensory, like experiences in general, are multi-level, multi-dimensional, and they involve so many different angles that one of the key challenges is bring people from different disciplines to try to understand it in a way that allows us to understand that complexity. So what you're saying is like, how do we understand the experience? How the data collection? Well, at the neural level, we can infer certain things, but then if people don't report what their subjective experience is, at this moment, we cannot know what the subjective experience is. And if we don't know how they're behaving in the context where they are, because if you think about neural activity, then you have people in the lab. Subjective experiences, they could be in their houses, but then they're reporting something about how they feel in a restaurant. So if you don't put people in the restaurant context where the chef is actually giving them the food, say we're talking about food experiences, then how do you know that the experience is kind of like creating the way it is? So data collection needs to be multi-level, multi-dimensional, and needs to involve multiple different kinds of people that allow us to conceptualize experiences.
So maybe just to add something there. I mean, I fully agree with the kind of what Carlos said. I think what I would like to add is that what I try to do a lot, and I think Carlos also does this very user-centered approach, that we really keep the human into the center of attention while we have to address all the other challenges as well. And when I look at the human, as you mentioned, Melissa, so yes, there are some physiological measures we might do in order to get the reactions from the body, but we also combine them with self-report questionnaires, but also interviews. And one of the specific interviewing technique I got trained in and trying to apply is microphenomenology, where you're trying to really help people to verbalize their experiences, and they're often not aware of them, especially when you talk about sensory experiences. So you're trying to really unfold these experiences on a timeline, and then try to identify those specific moments and try to describe them. And you can not just describe, you can then also quantify them. But it's a very kind of like a time-consuming process, which we applied for taste and smell and also touch experiences. But I think it then in the end allows you to create a higher level classification, which still keeps this connection to the descriptions you got from the users.
Most definitely. I actually have, two more questions as well. One from our YouTube as well.
We talked too long.
It's going crazy. So just to follow up from the collection of data, have you or do you ever look at books or written materials, so as in fiction books, and seeing how those ways that people describe experiences, is that ever considered collectible data that you can then conjugate on a large scale and then universalize it the experience?
Actually, if you allow me to say something on that, I actually have a current project with some researchers where we are using a machine learning, basically, where we drag tons of millions of words from books, articles, and different things to try to understand how we conceptualize specific aspects of human experience. So there is a big job that actually machine learning techniques like machine learning and others can actually do by understanding that written text that is available, if that's what you refer to.
I think so. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And I agree. There is kind of lots of that you can also see right now for smell experiences, where there is research where they are basically scraping the internet for all kind of words related to smell, olfaction, odor, and then trying to kind of contextualize that. And there's also, Google, for instance, does some really interesting work on predicting molecules also in relation to smell experiences or smell perception, and new kind of approaches, especially from natural language processing, are now applied, where you can really contextualize and understand not just the one word, but also do all the kind of embedding around it, which I think is super exciting. And I like the fact that there is, again, this kind of big data you can draw on, but at the same time, I'm a big believer that we need to actually gather the data from the human, because we need to also understand how it was created. Just because it's kind of like this balance between, we need data, but at the same time, we really need to have the origin of the data and this creation of the.
And it's in that conversation between looking at the humans and any data that is available that we can actually create models that allow us to use them as lenses to look at more data. Because in the end, that's what we need. We need models that allow us to interpret the data. The data by itself doesn't really tell us much.
Wow. All right, well then, yeah, you guys answered that really well. I'll move on to the next question. We have a couple actually to get through. I don't know. One of our audience would like to know, how do you see multisensory experiences impact the entertainment industry? Do you see a future where a movie could stimulate a real-life experience using the combination of insights, sounds, and haptics?
That is actually an awesome question, because Mariana and I wrote an article about it.
Perfect.
This is a dream that has been out there for ages. If you think about just cinema, people like Walt Disney, they didn't envision just audiovisual cinema. They were the first to say, what happens if we put moving pictures with sound? Maybe something else happens. And then they created Disney Fantasia and movies like that. But then they also envisioned, what if we can add smell? What if we can add taste? What if we can add all these different levels of human experiences? But the challenge has been both technical, in one sense, how do you actually implement it? And the second one is, how do you implement it in a meaningful way, which means, how do you capitalize on principles of how we experience the world so that you can design the experience? And there have been attempts in the 60s, in the 70s. There are technologies like Odorama. I don't remember the names at the moment, but there are 2 or 3 attempts, but they failed. But nowadays, and I give you a word with this, Mariana, you can see, for example, 4DX, which is kind of like an enhancement of those initial attempts, where you integrate wind, temperature, and stuff like that in a perhaps more technically sound way and meaningful, but still with challenges.
Yeah, I agree. And I think although 4DX has already made much improvements and allows us to have this multisensory entertainment movie experiences, I think one of the key challenges there is still it's not personalized. So everyone is, and I'm not saying that sound or visual are personalized, because obviously a movie, there's a director and that's the creative freedom to create it. But I think we actually have the opportunity to personalize it more to the human capabilities, to the individual capabilities of perceiving, because not everyone is perceiving the same way. I mean, my olfactory smell perception might be better than the one of my husband, or my taste perception is also different. So we actually start understanding those differences, and we somehow could also capture them in order to create more meaningful personal experiences, even when it comes to entertainment, where obviously there is a lot of interest because they are the ones which have this creative mindset to really go out of the way and exploring new things, which you cannot easily do, for instance, in a healthcare environment or in a work environment, because you have to follow certain principles.
Yeah, I suppose another question might be, if we're just looking at the entertainment industry, also connecting people with multicultural entertainment industries. So as in, you might have a certain experience watching a Western film versus maybe a different experience for Bollywood. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think I know Imagineers have always tried to do it with the Disney theme parks, right? They've tried to recreate some of the olfactory senses, visual experiences that you would try to create or experience in all sorts of different contexts, and be it in rides or in movies. The challenge, I think, and bringing it back to kind of the conversation, is kind of the role of the human at the center of all these multisensory experiences and the technologies we're creating to augment them, right? And the one question I think that has come up in a lot of people's minds is kind of the fine line between what is a real experience that we ourselves are having versus a prefabricated experience. Is there any difference between the two, or are they just the same thing? So,
Carlos, do you want to get started on that?
You just asked a question that philosophers have been trying to answer for hundreds of years. So it's actually a very, very nice question. So some of the recent theories of perception, there's one particularly that comes to mind, which is predictive coding. What they say is that basically what you perceive is in a way your brain's best prediction of the likely state of the sensory elements that are out there. So it's a prediction in the sense that, yes, you have all to be able to perceive certain things, but you have certain experiences that help you to interpret what you are perceiving in your environment. So in a way, you already live in a sort of like not so real reality, in the sense that there are physical and chemical stimuli out there, let's say, but your brain is kind of like coloring them with some interpretation based on your experience, right? So add another level to that, and somebody else is trying to hack that system. So you're already not perceiving the reality. Now somebody else is trying to understand how that perception works and trying to guide it towards a specific way. So my short answer would be, but this is going to be completely debatable. I just want to make it clear, because I know that many people may not agree, is you're not necessarily perceiving reality as it is, but as you believe it is. And what makes the difference in between real and not real reality? I think it just dissolves when you think about the problem in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just to add, and I agree with that, is in our book we try to define multisensory experiences, and also we try to make the distinction between experiences and how we understand multisensory experiences, because walking through the woods is an experience. And you have all the different senses involved. But if there is a landscape gardener creating the walk through the woods, then that's kind of a different multisensory experience, or experience itself. And I think that's the distinction we're also trying to make, that with new technologies and with the new understanding on experiences and how we perceive the world, we can now start creating those experiences through integrating technology and the senses. But we need to be careful that, how reality is still perceived, but also this kind of like technology has already changed our reality in a lot of ways. So
if you allow me to complement that, what Mariana is saying, I think one of the questions that we sometimes forget is, because we stay in the conversation of what is in the end the reality that we have and the reality that others may kind of like try to guide us, but the key question is more about the intentionality of those who want to create it. I think none of us would disagree that there is Central Park in our city that has the aim to make us more relaxed and interact, right? But all of us would probably argue against worse intention than that, if they want us to behave in a specific way. So I think there's someone that is designing, trying to create a reality. We have to ask that person, what is your intention? What are you trying to do based on one principles, based on one elements? How are you actually coming up with what you're coming up? So that we all shape that reality that we want to experience.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I guess the question would be, what is the role of artificial intelligence and all of that, and the responsibility, or if ever, of people who are defining artificial intelligence, be they in researchers or industry or even in policy? Well, what is your opinion on that?
So I think it's exactly what we try to discuss in the end of our book, that where we set out the 3 laws for multisensory experiences and creating multisensory experiences, because we believe that it needs to be clear who is the someone who is creating, if it's the government or if it's an individual for their partner, or if it's a company, because they have different intentions. And we as a receiver, we should be made aware of that. Obviously, it's not always the kind of point to tell me exactly what the experience is, because then we wouldn't enjoy a nice fine dining experience in the evening or a nice movie if I know everything in advance. But there is obviously a consideration if it is something which may harm a person or not. So what is important is none of those experiences should harm a person, and we need to understand what are the elements and who created that in order to make that discussion. And we are not providing like a solution at the end of the book, but what we really try to stimulate is a discourse, this kind of discussion about these opportunities where AI will take an important role, because it has the opportunity to really take all the information we now have on how people perceive the world, the experiences, the data. They can kind of like create new experiences instantaneously, maybe not instantaneously, but much faster maybe than we can, and then present them in virtual reality and create new worlds. But we kind of need to be careful, again, back to what is the data, who is creating it, with what intention, in order to kind of like decide where to draw the limits. I mean, it all goes back to responsible AI and also trying to avoid biases. So one of the examples we have also is, if you're designing for Western cultures or developing countries, there are differences you need to take into account, socioeconomical differences, in order to ensure equality and not exclusion.
Yeah.
So, while we're on the topic of risk, actually, someone asked on our Facebook, what are some of the cyber risks involved with multisensory experiences? Will this be an open season for aspiring hackers?
Every innovation, every technology, I think, inspires hacker, and there will be security questions. And I think that is exactly what we try to motivate, also to think about those potential risks and security breaches which we are opening up. Because if we are starting to design meals for health, for healthcare, or care home inhabitants or children, I mean, you don't want anyone to mess around with the smell stimuli or with the taste stimuli we are using. I think we are now in the right moment, right time, that technology is developing and showing us what we can, and we understand much better how people perceive, and we are now able to define this path forward, what application services are emerging, and then also take into consideration what safety and privacy kind of like principles we need to put in place.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then another one, I suppose, is can sensory AI be used to help people make, I suppose, good choices, such as live a more ecological lifestyle, or healthier lifestyle? can sensory AI play a role in that?
I personally think yes, because we see so many devices like, I don't know, just Apple Watch or other kind of like watches which trying to help us to stand up more or to keep physically fit. And I think one of the things I'm trying to pursue right now also is like how to keep our senses fit by training, for instance, our sense of smell or sense of taste, because we never think of those senses as we do maybe our eyes or hearing. We go check them out regularly to see if they are still okay. But have you ever checked your nose or tongue? I think it's recently where we have those questions because of COVID-19, because people suddenly lose their sense of smell and taste. And then it's like this whole uncertainty of like, I mean, why can I not smell? And other people don't even understand that I cannot just easily go to my GP, my doctor, and ask, because they also don't have the right tools, they don't have the right methods or processes in place. So I think there's a lot of opportunities where then sensory AI can be very helpful in creating these personalized services in various contexts.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's a really great point to make, and I think we're about running out of time. Melissa, are there any other questions that are coming up, or
just yes, there was one. There's two more questions. Right, we'll try to wrap it up quickly, and if we can't get through it all, maybe we'll just send it to you and see if we can answer our audience on our stream.
Sure.
So you mentioned creating sensory experiences for developing countries, emerging economies versus maybe a developed country. So can you give sort of a use case for how sensory AI can play in an emerging economy? Like, what sort of case study, for example?
I can give you something. I can maybe say two comments about it, and then Mariana, maybe you can complement me. But the first one is, I think, again, we go back to where the data comes from. And I think many initiatives that we have in the world are in many cases inspired by, for example, our experiences in research that is based on what in psychology we call weird participants. Probably you've heard about it. It's like these Western industrialized, like all these different kind of like attributes that they used to describe participants that are from basically well-known colleges around the world or universities around the world and stuff like that. So the first thing is, let's try to see how we can actually use data from the places of origin and balance out in a way what we know from other places. There have been cases in my own research where I do a study in the UK and it just doesn't replicate in Colombia, where I'm from originally. So how do you balance that out? That's one point. And the second one, maybe this is something that it's still work in progress, but many of you probably are aware of this fact that Colombia is in a sort of post-conflict moment in its history. And one of the questions that we were thinking of is, what if we use machine learning to sort of analyze all the different monuments that are around the world and see the extent to which they evoke the feeling of peace in a country, such that you can use that information to design later peace monuments that help and support the reconciliation process in the country. So just one example that I can come up with.
Yeah.
So I think just to add one possible scenario, I haven't worked on that particular, but so multisensory experiences have a lot of opportunity for accessibility and also in an educational context. So one of my PhD students who is blind cannot kind of like see all the beautiful visual representations or animations, and also is basically not limited to reading. And maybe there is an opportunity to kind of make information more accessible, because you can convey it through other means. And we also know that if you add touch or smell, it might make it more memorable. So I think there is an opportunity to really explore the space around education and accessibility, which doesn't necessarily mean to kind of start with visual or writing, but you're using and exploring different ways of learning.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, and I think thank you for bringing all of that up. I really like the idea of the peace monuments actually, because it's such a fascinating thing that we normally don't get to talk about. I'm afraid we're running out of time, so I think I'll ask the final question, and hopefully, Melissa, if there are more questions that come up, let's pull them together, and we'll bring it to our esteemed guests, and hopefully we can have some follow-ups. It's been a great conversation, so I'm enjoying listening. So I guess my last question, and hopefully it's a good one to kind of end on a very positive note, is where ideally would you like us to go with integrated technology, integrated AI, and multisensory experiences?
You have very good questions.
I do want a short answer. That's the challenge. Because I think, and again, I'm referring to what we say at the end of our book, there's so many opportunities. And I think what we can do is really just limited by our imagination in a way. And I think it's important that everyone tries to engage with the topic and then tries to identify if wherever you and whatever you're working on, if there is an opportunity to really think multisensory, because it could help make a difference. And we have different concepts and questions in our book which are trying to kind of help you in this reflection. We even have like a toolkit at the end as an appendix to help you think of your own design of multisensory experiences. So I don't really want to constrain it to anything. The only one I want to say is we don't think, or we don't want to promote that multisensory experiences have to be designed for everything, because you don't want to smell or taste or touch everything in your everyday life. Although we actually do, but we kind of like just our brain is suppressing it and just brings it up whenever it's necessary. But I think you should just think about when does it actually make sense? When is it meaningful to support, augment, and improve a current situation?
I think I'll just complement that with, we end the book with a sentence of Henry David Thoreau that says, "This world is but canvases to our imaginations." And basically what we want to do is to bring this concept of multisensory experiences to everyone, so that we can think that in the end, the world is actually a canvas. And we have certain knowledge about the senses and certain sensory elements that can help us create our imaginations in it.
No, that's fantastic. And on that note, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be here. It's been actually quite a great conversation. I'm really glad we got a chance to reconnect. And so we're going to start wrapping up and talk a little bit about what's next for AI for Good, what's coming up in the next few weeks. Give me a little sneak peek on what's in our program. So thanks so much, Mariana and Carlos. I'll just turn you off for a second.
Thanks, Juan.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. So let's talk about the next steps or the next things that are happening for AI for Good. Melissa, why don't you take us away and tell us what's coming up?
Thanks, Juan. Coming up next is AI safety and ethics for self-driving, introducing the Molly problem. Join us for a far-reaching debate on the safe and ethical deployment of AI on our roads. To be a part of the conversation, please feel free to submit your thoughts in a survey, which is linked to our website and in the comments below. Moreover, human collaboration with an AI musician, Monash University and Goldsmiths University of London will be discussing how you can augment human creativity using AI. We're ending on a high note with an online concert. Following, Ethical AI for Good. Capgemini will be conducting a 2.5-hour workshop demonstrating how your country can achieve ethical AI. And finally, ETRI's AI for Making a Better Tomorrow, AI for Security and Privacy. Our third and final episode discussing how technology can tackle abuse and illegal attacks and much more with the use of frontier technologies and AI. Thanks very much. Back over to you, Juan.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So I'm going to take away. We're going to talk a little bit about the AI for Good Global Summit again. So again, the AI for Good Global Summit is the leading United Nations platform for action-oriented, global, and inclusive dialogue of AI. AI for Good Let's Talk, our series of fireside chats, is one of the many programs that we're doing for it with the goal of identifying practical applications to AI to advance the Sustainable Development Goals and scale those goals towards global impact. So AI for Good Summit, again, is organized with ITU and XPRIZE, in partnership with 37 UN organizations, ASEAN, and co-convened with Switzerland. If you're interested in all these, feel free to watch again. If not, we also have our programming available on the website as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you have a really great day and a really great weekend. Thanks so much.